Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Chernobyl, the HBO miniseries from 2019. Oh boy, where do we even start with this one? We have to start with a contemporary historical context. I have to say, I watched this in no small part because of current events. And the current events are that the Russian Federation, under direction of its prime minister, or president, what's his title? Anyway, Vladimir Putin, has instructed the military of the Russian Federation to invade the sovereign nation of Ukraine. This one's going to get political. Not crazy political, just enough. A lot of people don't know much about Chernobyl, about the historical event. Don't know much about the USSR in general. Or if they know anything, maybe they think Chernobyl was in Russia. It wasn't. It was in Ukraine. It was actually not far from the capital of Ukraine, of modern Ukraine, Kyiv, when it was under Soviet control as one of the Soviet socialist republics, so to speak. This event happened in 1986. It is not as long ago as people think. It was 35 years ago. And I think that is extremely relevant, both in terms of historical memory and modern cultural relevance, and as well as a reminder of the state of the world merely 35 years ago, as well as the many problems that existed in the USSR. Chernobyl was a nuclear disaster of epic proportions that is arguably one of the most important events in modern history, and continues to taint the name of nuclear power in general. Now, nuclear power is not perfect, but as far as high density, relatively clean power generation, it is an important thing that often gets vilified. And to some extent, I understand the feeling that some people have, but I don't agree. However, having not lived through Chernobyl or any of the other, well, obviously Fukushima, but any of the other really substantial, newsworthy nuclear disasters, I have to admit that my view is skewed. And if you saw the events of Chernobyl unfold on TV, whether nationally or internationally, I can certainly imagine why that would be burned into your mind for the rest of your life as a reason not to trust nuclear power. But I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating and important about both this series and about the historical knowledge in general, is because the series really focuses on the people and the place and the time, more so than the event itself. It does a great job of showing the event at the level that it needs to. But it is largely about the people and trying to deal with the aftermath of the explosion and meltdown and cleanup. and mitigation process. And it is very, very tightly scoped. Actually, not as tightly scoped as I thought, but it is scoped to about 2 years, rather than straying really at any point into the time before or the time after. However, to my point, the most important part here is that it's really more of a study of the people and their dynamics between each other, and how the USSR and the structure of Stalinist totalitarianism continued well into the modern era, and how building a political and social structure based on nationalism and totalitarian designs leads to a society that is deeply unprepared and ill-informed to cope with surprises or unknown effects or whatever, however you want to characterize any event. And I started watching the series about a week ago, and the modern situation has only gotten worse as a result. I started watching it about when it was announced that Russian troops had, coming through Belarus, had been fighting in the Chernobyl exclusion zone near the reactor, which to this day, as of 2017, it is now entombed in a new structure meant to contain it further. But it will be a perpetual blight on the earth for thousands of years. A mistake humanity made that literally cannot be made to go away. And so when I, with my human eyes, had to read Russian troops are shooting at Chernobyl, that was, I guess that seemed like the time. I'm going to keep from discussing specific events, current events, too much in this video, but I think what is most important and relevant here is that Putin, as a leader of the Russian Federation, is a man who grew up deep in Cold War Russia and worked for the KGB and then the FSB, and then came to power having grown up idolizing the structures of Soviet Russia, which is really socialist in name only. But I mean, to this day, for the last couple of years especially, it's been a very hot topic to debate the idea of socialism and all these other things, when in reality, most of the historical things that are referred to as socialism and communism are actually totalitarianism in disguise. The Soviet regime, for its however many years, what is it, 70? No, not quite. It's like, what did it fall, 91? And depending on when you count the beginning of this, the Soviet regime. Anyway, it was totalitarian from the start. And the structures that were built in order to keep oligarchs in power and the political party basically being an exclusionary group of, elites. That is, to this day, an idea that for some reason, Putin, and he's not alone, a number of people in Russia idolize. And some of the other states, like Belarus, has its own problems. Anyway, and it's bizarre because if there's one thing this series, and I mean, at the time that Chernobyl happened, it was an exemplar for things that went wrong under the constraints of a totalitarian regime. And to find out that somebody in the modern age who is leading a country idolizes that era and is, by all accounts, appears to want to return to that kind of political structure, and is literally today making laws to silence the news and restrict what can be said on television and in print, and jail people for calling military action an invasion, which it is, that it makes it all the more bizarre to know that basically continues uninterrupted. The Soviet Union may have fallen, but the effect of the interests of the people who were in power, and in some cases continue to be in power, depending on which country you're in, echo to this day. Anyway, I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent. The show is extremely good on a lot of fronts. As far as its total historical accuracy, like I said, I think I said before, there's certainly some, this is mostly focusing around real people, although there is some artistic liberty taken, obviously, both with individuals and creating new individuals in order to tell a concise story that can fit into 5 one-hour episodes, which is really a feat, I would say. But it's really excellently made and focuses on all the right things in all the right places, I think. It is hard to pin this down to a genre other than maybe drama, but in a lot of ways it's more horror than anything else. I don't think it's controversial to say that living in a political state that refuses to tell you when you might be about to die, and treats human life and the life of citizens as expendable and negligible, while proclaiming to be for the people, by the people, all that kind of thing, it's horrifying. I mean, it's a very existential horror, and a lot of the cinematic storytelling elements that are used are very reminiscent of things you would see in, I think, modern high quality horror movie or TV production. The production quality overall is extremely high. I'm actually not sure. There's some of it that's definitely CGI. There's some of it, I don't think any of, as far as I'm aware, none of this was filmed in the exclusion zone, but I might be mistaken about that. There is some limited use of historical footage, but for the most part, it's just really high production value. Now, obviously, there's some artistic liberty taken in sets and designs, but as far as articulating the feeling of the level of decay and the level of like basically what the planned cities were like in the late Soviet era, I think it captures that really well. That's done not only in things like makeup and hair and costuming, and a variety of other things like that, like the sets, but is also done cinematically in terms of they use film. I believe this whole thing is shot on film, or if not, the use of film grain post-processing is extremely well done. It uses rather severe but not overwhelming color grading, mostly in the sort of blue-green area, which really lends to a sickly, horrific kind of feeling. A very unsettling, unnatural feeling. Likewise, the music and sound design is really excellent. Sometimes a little bit heavy-handed, but about articulating the sort of both the environmental effects and impending doom, but also a lot of very heavy emotionality. And it's a credit to the compositions that it incorporates both those environmental effects and the emotional ones, but also I think makes really smart and interesting use of like real life environmental noises, as opposed to the environmental effects, which is more of a like musical metaphor for the events unfolding and the physical space that is being visually represented. There's also some really interesting use of noises like the sound of Geiger counters or construction effects or things like that. And so I think the music does an admirable job. The heavy-handed bits are more towards the front of the series, and they don't stick out dramatically. They're just very sort of like, we want you to know that this is horrific, and remind you that this is a creeping death that the characters have not yet fully acknowledged, either out of ignorance or out of it being hidden from them. It's really well written. I think all of the characters are extremely believably written. There's a few, I'm going to say, side stories with some more minor characters that, while really well written and acted and produced, are a little bit too much of a tangent for my tastes in terms of the storytelling. And while they are, I think, a really good representation of a different perspective of people dealing with the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster, that they don't tie tightly enough into the main through line of the story to not feel somewhat disjointed. As long as we're talking about the acting, I mean, so the whole thing is done in English, and it is done mostly by British actors. all English speaking actors. The three sort of most the three biggest characters are played by Jared Harris, who I believe is British, Emily Watson, who's British as well, and then Stellan Skarsgård, I believe, is Swedish. All three of them put on really incredible performances, but the performances across the board are very strong. Very minor characters put on excellent performances. And overall, I'm very, very happy with both dialogue delivery and physical delivery, but also the portrayal of. I think it's very hard to portray somebody who is lying, for want of a better phrase. Any character who is in a situation in which they have to trick the people in the scene into believing them, or at least come close to tricking them, but still get through to the audience that they know that they're lying, or that they are at least not as confident as they are they're presenting themselves to be, is a very fine line to walk. And there's a lot of that in this film. Obviously, under the context of the Soviet state, the pervasiveness of the secret police, the KGB, and people being basically political witch hunting for people who were disloyal to the state, which could be any excuse. It was just, a hammer to be swung with impunity by people in power against people with less power. And so to see the character dynamics and how they are portrayed by all of these characters, and how the social and cultural dynamics in the contexts in the series are really, really interesting and really, really well delivered. There are some production things that I think are a little bit overdone. But there are also some things that are really nice. In addition to the color grading, which again is on the cusp of being overbearing, but not much. I also think it does a really nice job of working with the visual medium and using especially light and shadow and unusual visual spaces in meaningful and interesting ways. The inside of, a reactor building are not the typical structures in which you see a lot of film shot. There's a lot of interesting use of industrial spaces, partially destroyed spaces, spaces that are sometimes just sort of foreign in the sense of not being, I apologize for my creaking chair. This chair sucks. The spaces that are foreign in the sense of being unusual to see either in real life or on TV. Run down spaces, very rural spaces, huts made out of, like in that are, basically made out of wood and sticks and mud. And also these contrasted with these, Soviet blocks, the structures that are, that, remind people of what, Soviet cities were like, of those very heavily planned, production cities. And with all of that in mind, I think it's important to remember again that this is not that long ago, and that there's lots of people who remember this well, either who were just around at the time in general internationally because this was an international incident, or who were in that space and with this modern historical context of Ukraine being threatened and their nuclear assets being threatened. Oh, the most recent thing being a different active nuclear reactor in Ukraine that's in use being fired upon with guns and rockets and missiles. I mean, holy shit. Anyway, I'll try not to digress too much. The series has a lot to say and a lot to teach and a lot to bring back in terms of memory, either your memories or other people's memories. And a reminder that totalitarianism is not just bad because it directly suppresses people, but because of all of the things that ripple out from it. And this is not just, a commentary on totalitarianism or on so-called Soviet socialism or whatever. It's about what happens when people are pushed to conform to certain societal constraints, and what kind of negligence that good people can do, or what kind of evil that maybe neutral people can get up to if they are empowered by a structure that protects them from the ramifications, or they believe protects them from the ramifications. What are the structures of power, and how do they affect people all the way down the chain? How does the decision of somebody in a very high power position, affect some rural subsistence farmer? And what does it turn a culture into when the vast majority even of people might not agree with what the culture says, but the threats that culture presents to them, the threats to their life and livelihood and the people who they care about, and the lies that they're told, what that means for them and what that means about their decisions, and the stresses that are put on people as a result, and the actions they may take that are easy to say in a vacuum that was evil or bad or the wrong thing to do, but maybe in the moment seem like the only thing they can do. And that sometimes the freest people under heavy strictures are the ones with very little to lose. I pray that we don't have any more nuclear incidents in my lifetime, or hopefully ever. Nuclear engineering is incredibly important to the human race, but it has to be handled with care. I know there's some other series, and I don't remember if it was in my Solipsist Watch series or one of my game series, where I talked about nuclear physics, and I'm hardly an expert. But it goes without saying that it has to be handled with care. But I also think it's an incredibly important thing that needs to not be vilified or reduced, and even to say something like, somehow it's still controversial to say Chernobyl was not a failure of nuclear power, it was a failure of people. And I think that is one of the most important reminders that can come out of this, is people are fallible and people are dangerous to themselves and others, and the collective mind power of people can be set to good or evil, and it can be pretty gray to figure out which one you're in, especially when you're in it. Anyway, I'm just waxing philosophical at this point. This is a really good series. It's not perfect, but I really like it. It's also extremely emotionally draining. And though it has a few moments of humor and levity, and a few moments of hopefulness, in large part it's a cautionary tale. And I admire all of the people who are on this production for producing something that, while not a documentary, perhaps does a lot more to remind us not to forget history, and that understanding the world you live in and the people who are around you, and that the people in power are all incredibly important. Anyway, before I go on any further, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.